Hi everyone, welcome to another All Nation Line video. The title of today's video is The Quiet Web and Why New Tracks Modeling Matters. Here's something that'll mess with your head a little. There's websites out there, publicly accessible, no password required, sitting right on the open internet that you will never find with Google. Not because they're hidden, not because they're shady, just because nobody's linking to them and the bots never went looking. We call that the quiet web. And as luck would have it, and I mean pure accident, that's exactly where I stumbled onto something that I think is one of the most important stories in our hobby right now. A story about a man named Jim Kello, about a concept called new tracks modeling, and about what it actually takes to keep this hobby alive for the next generation. I promise you, stick with me on this one. It's going to open up a whole new world. At least it did for me. Okay, so let's set the table here because you need this background to appreciate what's coming next. We're going to discuss what is the quiet web. You probably heard items or terms thrown around like the dark web, the deep web, the surface web, all Greek territory, right? But there's more specific thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to call it the quiet web because that's exactly what it is. The quiet web is public. It's not illegal, not secretive, not behind a paywall. It's just undiscoverable. Undiscoverable links that may be useful to a hobbyist. Unless you already know the exact URL, you may not be able to find it except perhaps by accident. Why does a normal website go quiet? No other sites link to it, so the search bots never find it. It's old and abandoned, so it stopped getting crawled, or it's just a plain static HTML page that hasn't changed in 20 years. In the O-scale modeling world, my world, I run into these sites all the time. Excellent resources, incredible content, just sitting there in digital silence, which honestly is kind of a metaphor for the whole problem we're facing in the hobby. Great stuff exists, it's just not findable. So now I'll talk about an accidental discovery. So here's how this whole thing started. I was trying to figure out something pretty simple. How do we get younger people into this hobby? I went to the usual search engines, asked the usual questions, and I basically got nowhere. But in the process of getting nowhere, I accidentally stumbled onto something that had been sitting quietly on the web for years. The website called teenrailroadmodel.org, the Teen Association of Model Railroaders, an acronym called TAMR, which I will pronounce as TAMR from this point on. And I want to give credit where it's due. Most probably, a fellow named Tim Vermande had the foresight to digitize and post all or most of the old newsletters from this organization going back decades. The whole archive is right there online for free, just quiet. Now here's where I made a decision that's changed the direction of this whole project. Instead of just skimming those newsletters, I decided to do a deep dive, and I mean deep. I asked our paid subscription to Anthropic's Claude, the AI, to analyze the entire archive, all the PDF newsletters, every single one. What came back was a 20-page analytical document, and I'm not going to lie, I read every word of it, validated it, added to it where I could, because it was telling me was not what I expected. Now, before we get into what the analysis found, I need to introduce you to Jim Kello. He's a master model railroader because everything I'm about to say connects back to him. Jim is the innovator behind New Tracks modeling. He can be found online. The concept is this: experienced model builders helping other model makers build better layouts, dioramas, kits. Mentorship, in other words. When you look holistically at everything Jim has done, the developer of Young Model Railroaders, the scholarships, the community building, I hold great admiration for what they've accomplished. It's quite an operation, but it matters enormously. Here's the thing. What the TAMR archive analysis revealed through a line of questioning that had nothing to do with New Tracks modeling is that Jim's approach has a name, a concept, something the research calls a production culture. Once you understand what that means, everything else falls into place. So what is the production culture? The simple version here, it's a community where the currency of belonging is making things, building something, documenting it, sharing the craft. Not just watching, not just scrolling, actually producing. The TAMR, at its best, was exactly that. Teenagers writing technically sophisticated articles about kit bashing, prototype research, operations systems. The writing was downstream of the doing. You had to have built something before you had anything to say. So New Tracks modeling is the same thing, rebuilt for today. Thankfully, they have a lot of volunteers helping young modelers in their skill sets. So that's the connection, and it didn't become obvious to me until we started interrogating the research. And so what the research actually found. So, okay, let me give you the highlights from the Q&A analysis, because this is where it gets genuinely useful for anyone thinking about the future of this hobby. Teens who joined the TAMR were seriously building, had retention rates of 50 to 60% into adult modeling. Compare that to the general population of kids who got train sets as gifts. Maybe 10 to 15% stayed. The self-selection effect is real. A teenager who sought out a national organization, paid dues, and wrote newsletter articles was already a different kind of hobbyist than the kid with a train set under the Christmas tree. Second finding, what a teenager wrote about predicted how long they stayed in the hobby. Prototype researchers and technical modelers showed the highest long-term retention, likely 70% or more. This is the part that blew me away. The article type isn't just content, it's a window into how deep the hobby has gone into someone's identity. A 17-year-old writing a technically sophisticated defensive end scale has the hobby woven into how they think. Those are the lifers. Social media is largely an armchair hobby experience. Someone who spends 2 years watching model railroad content on YouTube has accumulated zero transferable hobby skills. They haven't learned to solder, ballast track, wire a DCC decoder. They've learned to scroll and probably have been well entertained in that process. The newsletter, for all its inefficiency and expense, was a more sophisticated organizational instrument than anything TAMR had used since. The organization's actually growing youth participation today are doing it through hands-on production, school clubs, project completion, mentorship, not social media reach. Social media is fine as a discovery tool, top of the funnel. A teenager sees a beautifully weathered locomotive on Instagram, gets curious, investigates. That's great. But a view is not a member. A like is not a commitment. The air is treating top of funnel awareness as if it were engagement. So, making the quiet loud, we're going to talk now a little bit about the TAMR index. So here's where we get to put our money where our mouth is. One of the things the analysis suggested, filter all the modeling articles out of those 100 plus newsletters and build a searchable index. Because right now, 35 years of craft knowledge is buried inside organizational noise, elections, treasurer reports, constitutional debates, and really useful stuff is there, but you have to read every single newsletter to find it. So that's exactly what we did with Claude doing the heavy lifting. We indexed the entire TAMR archive, pulling out every modeling article, every craft piece, every technical contribution, and built a searchable HTML page that would take you directly to the PDF file containing the article of interest. What was quiet is now findable, or as we may say, discoverable. 35 years of teen modeling knowledge, organized and searchable for the first time. And honestly, that's what the quiet web story was always building toward, not just identifying that this content exists, but actually doing something about it. So the big idea and a provocative thought. So let me bring this full circle and leave you with the idea that's been rattling around in my head since we did all this research. The best part about a deep dive like this is it gives you permission to entertain outlandish ideas, and here's mine. The TAMR charged minimal dues. Members who wrote articles were presumably paid up, but what if you flip that? What if, instead of asking teenagers to pay to contribute, you pay a stipend to teenage modelers who write for new tracks? Because here's what the white paper tells us, unambiguously. The teenagers who engage enough to write, who commit to the production culture, have the highest probability of staying in this hobby into adulthood. You want more lifers. Fund the writers. It's an outlandish idea. Maybe it doesn't pencil out, but the logic is airtight. Mentor a teen modeler today, and you'll keep a hobbyist for life. If I could put words in Jim Kello's mouth, and I think he'd agree, that would be it. We started this with a weird piece of internet geography, the quiet web, and we ended up somewhere I didn't expect when I started. A 35-year archive of teenage model railroaders, an AI-powered research deep dive, and what I think is a pretty compelling vindication of everything Jim has been building with New Tracks modeling. The connection isn't coincidental. It's the same insight, rediscovered through a completely different line of questioning. Production culture works. Mentorship works. Hands-on building works. The links to everything we talked about today are in the description. The TAMR archive, the modeling article index, New Tracks modeling. Go explore. These are quiet web resources that deserve to be loud. If this opened up a new corner of the hobby for you, or if you've got your own quiet web discovery to share, drop it in the comments. I read every one. Until next time, Enjoy.